Okay, so just to clear up some of the oblique hands-on treatment. So again, don't forget the testing, where we're going to go either proximal, middle third, or distal third usually to see which fibers. Now it's very hard to say whether it's the internal or external oblique with that. As I said, we want to shorten the pec obviously, but the thing I want to get cover in today's Mentorship Plus video is the directions, okay? So the internal obliques are going to attach around here and they're going to come down in this direction, okay? So obviously the frontal plane fibers are going to come this way and the transverse plane fibers are going to come this way, okay? And they're going to attach into the ilium. So I want to be on, for the internal obliques, I want to be on the ribs, okay? So again, if I'm over here, I'm lost. Okay, so here's the rib cage. Okay, I'm going to come probably just like a finger breadth.
So another really good week in the Mentorship Plus group. We've been having a lot of really good conversations about Module 5, which is the cervical spine, and kind of how it links a lot with Module 3, the upper limb, and Module 4, the lumbar spine as well. So it's all starting to come together, and some really good conversations going on from there. So there's been some really good questions in the group. We've had the coaching call replays up in the group, which again, the follow-up questions that have been really good. And we've had a lot of good wins this week as well. So Shane, one of the therapists who's been on the mentorship for about a year now, he was talking about a really good win he got with a girl who just couldn't get her hamstrings to loosen up. You know, she's been around to a lot of different therapists before, tried a lot of different stretches, but by maybe looking at things a little bit differently, Shane did a lot of work around her rib cage, and obviously the influence between the rib cage and the pelvis, was able to get her pelvis in a much better position and was able to get a touch on her toes for the first time in a long time. So some really good wins in the community this week. We've had a really good coaching call this morning. We had about 20 therapists live on the call, again discussing Module 5. So we're getting there now. Next week will be Module 6, so we're almost halfway through the January class, halfway through the mentorship content. The community is growing, and it's a really exciting time for the mentorship. So looking forward to the next 6 weeks. Next week we've got an implementation week, so we're kind of recapping the last 5 modules because they're really important, especially in the first 2 to 3 sessions with a patient. And there's also some content to help with some business skills, growing the business and stuff like that as well. So really looking forward to consolidating the last 5 weeks next week and then going into the higher level return to play stuff in the subsequent weeks after that.
A big part of our approach at the mentorship is to really appreciate the role that the rib cage plays in movement in general. Now, obviously, if we talk about the rib cage and the importance of the rib cage to depress, to retract as that person's about to touch their toes, and then the importance of the rib cage to protract and elevate as that person backward bends, then we have to understand and appreciate the diaphragm and the pelvic floor also, because they're going to react, and vice versa, the rib cage will react to the diaphragm and pelvic floor, and the pelvis will react to the pelvic floor in terms of respiration, but also in terms of movement. So that's something that we provide, or I'd like to think we provide a lot of clarity on in Module 4. So we focus a lot on the rib cage, and again, you know, it's a slightly different way of looking at the body, but actually when you think about it, a lot of people for low back pain, they'll focus a lot on the core muscles, on the obliques, on, you know, getting the transverse abdominis to maybe work better, for want of a better word. Not necessarily my approach, but you know, a lot of people out there will do that, which is fine. Whereas actually when we look at the anatomy, you know, in particular the internal obliques, they attach onto the rib cage and they attach on to the pelvis.
First of all, so it's left side flexion. So when she goes down to the left, that's bringing on that discomfort. So what I'd probably cross-reference that now with Martin is I'd go do the passive rib cage assessment again and just test the ability of that rib to passively side flex basically. So lying on her back, get it to exhale, you're going to passively bring her ribs into retraction depression. Get it to inhale again. As she exhales, apply a side force through her right rib cage, see if it's having to shift into the left. Then do the same with the left rib cage, see if it's having to shift into the right. So that's going to hopefully give you a bit more information about whether this is a Module 4 problem and a rib cage issue, or whether it's actually more of a Module 2 problem and it's actually the loading through the lateral hip that's a problem. Or maybe it's a little bit of both, and this is where we need to cross-reference our assessments now to figure out what we need to treat. If this is stiff, what I'd probably start with then is I'd restore the ability of the internal oblique. So I'd recheck her internal oblique on the left. I'd imagine that to be positive, because that's going to have to lengthen as she goes down this way. As she goes down to the left, her left internal oblique is going to have to lengthen, and that's going to have to lengthen, and she's going to need a motor output through her external oblique. So I'd probably get help with getting a motor output back through her external oblique, and I'd be doing a bit of work on helping her internal oblique to lengthen, basically. So that's the first thing. Cross-reference your passive ribcage assessment with your lower limb assessment, and then make that decision. And where I'd probably start with my hands on is I'd probably be working on bringing the left, so I'd have her on her side, I'll be bringing the left ribcage into depression and retraction in the frontal plane, and then I'd probably do a bit on the internal oblique first of all, if that's positive, to help it lengthen, so I get it to do right rotation, even though it's positive, even though it's clear in the generic objective, to get some load through that and help that to lengthen. I'll be doing a little bit of that while putting a lot of pressure into depression and retraction in the frontal plane on her left rib cage, and then also I'll be doing a bit on her external oblique as well, to get a motor output through that. So I'll probably get her maybe going in the frontal plane for those lower fibers of the external oblique, and then I'd recheck her side flexion as well on the left side. That's the big thing, I think, is we need to really figure out now whether this is a rib cage issue or whether it's actually a lower limb issue. She's not happy to shift onto her right hip as well, and that's also positive with her testing. So we've got a lot of information there. Now we need to decide, okay, what's the biggest bang for a buck here? And I think the best way to do that now is cross-reference with the passive assessment.
Okay, so we were actually just videoing content for Module 9 of the mentorship just 5 minutes ago, so this is quite fresh. So again, FAI hip impingement, another very interesting one. We'll have to have a very good understanding of what is driving this. So obviously when we bring the hip into flexion, there's a lot of tissues that have to have an ability to let go, to relax, to lengthen. There's some tissues that are going to have to shorten. So the interesting thing about this is we can change the pelvis position, so how the pelvis is sitting in relation to the femur, okay, very, very easily by manipulating how the rib cage is moving, okay? So it's not just as simple as and what I used to do initially was, let's get a mulligan belt and let's distract the hip and show we'd get a little bit of a short-term change in hip range of motion. A much better, much smarter approach now for me is, right, let's see what's the issue here. Is it maybe the rib cage and the pelvis are lacking mobility? And why is that? Okay, is it a diaphragm? Is it a pelvic floor contributing to that? Is it something completely different? Has the person got a bang in the ribs in the past? Is there some emotional stressors there? And again, once we find out why, then we go about restoring the ability to lengthen these tissues and tolerate load, okay? And tolerating load for someone with that may have emotional drivers, maybe putting them in scenarios and situations in environments that stress them and force them to be able to tolerate these environments with a normal respiratory rate, a normal breathing pattern, whatever that looks like, okay? So for me with FAI, I'm looking a lot at what's happening at the pelvis, at the rib cage. I'm looking a lot at what's happening at adductor magnus. I'm looking a lot at all the other tissues that are contributing to that movement of hip flexion, hip internal rotation. And again, specifically to the person, we're going to get a lot of clues in a subjective assessment. So it's not just a case of do this, this, and this. We have to understand your story and your injury history.